We would have our leaf blower who is causing slight problems, but anyway, just to say a few words about Calvin. I'll be quoting some words of Calvin here, and can I start with Erasmus, because I think Erasmus was an influence on both Luther and Calvin.
Quietness.
Erasmus, I suppose, the great humanist who precedes, in a sense, obviously Luther and Calvin, who was welcomed at all the royal courts of Europe. I mean, this is the extraordinary thing about Erasmus. He was welcomed by Henry VIII in England. He was welcomed by the Holy Roman Emperor in Germany, an incredible figure. And he was certainly quite willing to voice his criticisms of the Catholic Church of his time. Erasmus was, what's to say this, less radical than either Luther or Calvin. But I mean, there's one lovely quote here, which you may have come across from Erasmus. He says, he's against all these curative shrines and the bugbears of superstition, as he calls it. And he says, these absurdities are a good trade and procure a comfortable income to such priests and friars as by this craft get their gain. Here he is attacking, priests getting money by various ways. What shall I say of such as cry up and maintain the cheat of pardons and indulgences? He's saying exactly the same thing as Luther was saying. Right. Instantly coming from Erasmus. What can be said bad enough of others who pretend that by the force of such magical charms, or by the fumbling over their beads, golly, he's radical here, in the rehearsal of such and such petitions, they shall procure riches, honours, pleasure, long life, and lusty old age, nay, after death, a seat at the right hand of the Saviour. Erasmus is pretty radical.
Yeah,
he sounds very much like Luther. Luther, I find, almost gets the better of his own, what should we call it, his own sort of enthusiasm, and can go over the top. I don't know if I get it.
He was very outspoken.
He was very outspoken. And I'll just, have some quotes about Luther. I'll quote you the famous speech at the Diet of Worms. I think this is perhaps the most. You've done it. Okay. You've done a huge chunk of Luther. So we'll just.
This is just Calvin and Hugo.
Okay, so we'll go on from Luther to Calvin. By the way, did they say in German? I think this is extraordinarily important regarding Luther. His later works, he goes over the top in vituperativeness.
In what?
In being vituperative. He really gets vicious. The anti-Semitism that you find in Germany, I mean, there's a quote here, just do the first sentence, let whosoever can throw brimstone and pitch upon them. If one could hurl hellfire at them, so much the better. And this must be done for the honour of our Lord and of Christianity, so that God may see that we are indeed Christians. There are a lot of historians who've said that the vicious anti-Semitism that you get right throughout, the later history of Germany goes back to Luther.
Yes. So there's some good and bad, but Calvin seems a prude. He seems uptight and
Calvin seems much more uptight. I think that's the word, isn't it? Yeah.
And way in terms of enforcing his law upon society, whereas many people would not go that far.
Anyway, let's say this. Calvin, born not in Paris, but north of Paris, 1509 in Noyon. Comes, his father is in the church, isn't he? He has a church living. And I think Calvin is intending to study for the church, but I think it's his father who encourages him to study law. And so he's studying law, and then he comes up to Paris. And I suppose, like so many of the, what we call them, the humanists of his day, he is intent on really studying the Bible. And there's a fascinating quote here where you sense his enthusiasm and passion for the Bible compared with the great classical authors. Read Demosthenes or Cicero, read Plato, Aristotle, or any others of that class. These are all the great, classical authors. I grant you that you will be attracted, delighted, moved, and enraptured by them in a surprising manner. But if after reading them you turn to the perusal of the sacred volume, the Bible, whether you are willing or unwilling, it will affect you so powerfully, it will so penetrate your heart and impress so strongly on your mind that compared with its energetic influence on the beauties of rhetoricians and philosophers, will almost entirely disappear. So that it's easy to perceive something divine in the sacred scriptures, which far surpass the highest attainments and ornaments of human industry. There's this impact that the Bible has for Calvin.
Actually, you've got, if you want to know more about Calvin, go back to your PDFs. I know I sent 20 PDFs, so you're over-resourced. There's about Calvin adored and abhorred, about people who loved Calvin said this, people who despised him said this. He's uptight, he's heavy-handed. Others said, he's a genius. So you got a lot of this information. It's hard to catch with long quotes, but these are like one-off sentences. The Pope said this, his critics, his supporters and fans said this. So you've actually got this, and there's Calvin's chronology, his life, his history. You've actually got these materials. I had them yesterday, I don't have them today, thinking that, you do. But there's hot and cold. A lot of people had Cromwell did great things in Britain as a reformer, but did some terrible things, tore down monsters. A lot of people had the good side, the bad side.
The good side, bad side, but that's what you find throughout. You find throughout history, I suppose.
Calvin's, both Luther and Calvin are into predestination. Is this still with you a major core belief, or has that gone? I think it's been progressively gone down.
Here's why, just in a nutshell, we're off on a top discussion, tangent. Is if you believe in predestination, you don't have to do evangelism. Well, God's predestined. No, we don't have to do anything. God, whereas the Bible, the Bible says, "Go and tell, be a witness, let your light shine," which really has gotten pre-called some. I don't know. We're often a very big topic.
But that is no longer a big issue in Protestantism today. That's interesting. Yeah. And of course, Jesus says it surely. By their works shall ye know them. So surely in the words of Jesus.
Hopefully, we live such a good lifestyle, following Jesus. It feels like you're happy. What do you have? Booze isn't working, and adultery left me running. And they say, that's where the gospel should be. We're off on a digression. Back to Calvin.
Back to Calvin. I'll just say a few words about Calvin and predestination. It says, Calvin admits that predestination is repulsive to reason. He does say that. But he replies, it is unreasonable that man should scrutinize with impunity those things which the Lord has determined to be hidden in himself. I think that's quite a nice quote from Calvin. He says, obviously, if things may appear odd to us, but if the Lord decrees it, so be it, as it were. What I do think would be interesting is some quotes from visitors to Calvin's Geneva and first-hand accounts
of that.
You've done that? Okay. Okay.
Let's go with Calvin as important. But let's also try and touch on the Huguenots and coffee and Notre Dame. So we have
Huguenots and coffee and Notre Dame. Okay. Let's say this, that you know about the origin of the Huguenots, where it comes from, doesn't it?
Let's start from Huguenots 101, just a 5-minute summary.
Okay, Huguenots. The word comes from the German, the Swiss German Eidgenossen, which means confederate, and it's the name that was given to the Protestants initially at the time of Calvin, and the name stuck. It's just as I said, Eidgenossen, pronounced awkwardly, which gives you Huguenot. And it's, I suppose the name is essentially the name attached to the Huguenots in France. Certainly by the, let's say what, the 1520s, 1530s, the spirit of the Huguenots really catches on. I think it's their essential, hard work, I think one could say, that attracts people. They are certainly attracting people in the trades, in commerce, and among the aristocrats too. It's something that seems to catch people's imagination. They say, this is new, this makes sense to us. And I suppose, talking about the aristocrats, it catches on with no less a person than the sister of the then.
But the Huguenots, just to back up or digress, Huguenots were the Protestant church, the Protestant believers opposing the Catholics. Therefore, they got persecuted. So the Huguenots are a sad, miserable story of people who followed Jesus and got persecuted. So with that in context, how does that fit into Paris? Oh.
It fits into Paris. I mean, one of the problems that they encounter is the fact that the French kings, during their coronation ceremony, have to pronounce fidelity to the Catholic Church. That makes life difficult because the Huguenots, just as the Jews at a same period and later, were seen as a kind of foreign body. There's this otherness that doesn't go down well with the French, with French society. There certainly is an idea of, in the 1530s, as I said, with Huguenots influential actually in the royal court, that perhaps we may come to terms with them. But the kings, Louis XIII, for example, he sees it as his duty to preserve the, quote, true faith. It reaches a crunch point in the time of Louis XIV, where Louis XIV says you cannot have a society with competing religions. And of course it's Louis XIV who ultimately tries to destroy the Protestants with the revocation of the Edict of Nantes.
So I don't think church history is such a deep, large subject. It's almost easy to take it in layers and who, what, where, why, how. But the Huguenots were thousands of them murdered and persecuted. Terrible church history stuff. You read it, it's like, wow, where was God? But tell them about the persecutions under the Louvre and St. Bartholomew's.
I mean, that gets mightily horrible. There are, from the 1530s through to the 1580s, there are 8 religious wars pitting Protestants against Catholics. Sometimes the Protestants think they've got the royal court on their side, and certainly in the 1530s, they think that, 1540s rather, they think that their cause is being upheld by the king. But later you get a series of massacres of the Protestants before the infamous battle of, or the massacre of St. Bartholomew. You get in, this is when, a meeting of Protestant nobles in Amboise who try and persuade the young king at the time, Charles the Ninth, or try and get them to support them. Charles is not going along with that, and the Protestant nobles who have come to meet in Amboise are simply hanged by the dozen. This is a kind of precursor to the much more bloody massacres that come along in 1572. But there it is, and as a picture of it, it's called the Conspiracy at Amboise.
Bummer.
A bummer. And but what's happening by 1572? You've had, let's say this, the most powerful woman of the day is the widow of the French King Francis, one of the Medici princesses. So she's Italian, being Italian, she's Catholicism is in the blood, is in her very blood. She is there when her husband is killed in a joust here in Paris in 1559. She has 3 sons, all of whom become kings. The first one is a weakling, tubercular. He's dead just in his early 20s. He's the one who marries Mary, Queen of Scots. Don't forget, there's a link with the English crown here. Mary, Queen of Scots' mother is one of the great, from one of the great Catholic families of France, the Guise, G-U-I-S-E. The Guise are up there as the great supporters of Catholicism. Anything that goes against Catholicism, we will fight. And so they're up there as the, the protectors of the true faith. With all this hesitation that's going on in the royal court. The Guise are the kind of, we are standing for Catholicism. Francis II is dead, as I said, just after the age of 20. You get another king coming along, Charles IX, who's slightly unbalanced. It said that he would prance around the Louvre thinking he was a horse. I mean, it got that bad. He was mentally unstable.
But back to the Huguenots.
We're not losing them because his instability is what is going to count. He's now on the throne. This rather cookie, unstable fella. The powers that be, you've got the Guise family. You have as head of the army Admiral Coligny, who is from the Protestants. He has an idea. Why don't we try and bring the Protestants and the Catholics together by fighting against our common enemy, Spain, and liberating Flanders? That's an idea that he puts forward as reuniting, as bringing together the Protestants and the Catholics. If we fight Spain together, that will harmonize us. It's put before the Queen Mother. She's the person with the power. Like I said, Catherine de Medici. She is not keen on this idea at all. And she decides, perhaps unwisely, the best way of dealing with this problem is to kill Coligny. That goes back to the Queen. She gets one of her secret, shooters, to try and kill Coligny. It misfires. He's only wounded. Oops! And then we have a major problem on our hand. That's going to be at the side. In the meantime, the future king, who is seen by all the royal genealogists as going to be the next king, unfortunately for the court, as it were, he is a Protestant. Because the Valois line has died out. None of these fellas have children, the 3 sons. And so it's recognized that the next king is going to be a Protestant. They think, again, how are we going to solve this one? Why don't we marry him, a noted Protestant, off to the sister of these 3 kings? Mm-hmm. And if we marry them, that will be another attempt to bring things together. It achieves exactly the reverse effect. Because you get all the Protestants of the realm in Paris for the wedding of... That's the reason, that's what's happening. They're all here for the wedding of the King of Navarre with the sister of the three young kings, Queen Margot. And at the same time, you get Coligny, this attempt to assassinate Coligny. All the ingredients for an explosion are there. And so the Queen is now, I think people are going to reveal that she's behind it. And she's just terrified that this is not going to look good for her PR, as it were, that she's tried to murder the leader of the Protestants. And so she now goes in a mad campaign, as it were, to try and persuade her son, who is basically favourable to Coligny, a friend of Coligny, to claim that, rather than that she shot him, that Coligny is hatching a campaign to fight the Catholics. And this is the background to the so-called massacre of St. Bartholomew.
So if we could, just in the sake of time, and this is our one-time in Paris, and not to go into too much detail, because this is a morass of details that I get lost, as you may as well. But if we could summarize the Huguenots in like 1 minute, like the outcome was, the result is, which is it's an hour
Well, what happens is that Guise now says, okay, I'll finish him off for good. And so he does. And here is a nice picture of Coligny being butchered from his house, not far from the Louvre. All this, by the way, all these machinations are going on in the Louvre.
Yeah,
And
the Louvre Art Museum is where it's Bartholomew.
is where it all because that was the royal palace, and this is Coligny being thrown out and then just cut to pieces. And oh dear! And so the order is given to because Guise is responsible for this. He's now got the approval of the king because. As I said, the king was initially favourable to Coligny. Now he's persuaded by Guise and the queen to go ahead and so the traditional saying attributed to me after a night of what should we say, forced persuasion on the part of his mother and the Guise. Okay, we've got to kill him, and he says, okay, if you insist, tuez-les tous, kill them, kill all of them. Now the order has been given by the king himself, and it's agreed